Carlos. Okay. All right. Great. Hey, welcome everybody. Tonight we're going to have another fun-packed evening. We're going to talk about some stuff to get you all tuned up to get through that real estate exam, so you can get out there and start living the dream. And making some money for your family and fulfilling all the wishes and blessing lots of lives. It's going to be a good thing. So tonight we're going to be working on contracts primarily. Knowing the contract is really important for the exam. I would not walk in there and do the exam unless you have done sufficient work. Hello, Carlos. On the REPC. And what I mean by sufficient work is, I mean, you ought to I know a lot of you like just read it off your pad and whatnot, but whatever works for you. If you want to read it off your pad or your computer screen, that's okay. But I don't know. I like having a, piece of paper, but so I will print it, and then I'll read it and I'll highlight things that I'm confused on. And then I'll when you come to a class like this, you can ask questions and you can get your questions answered. But I think you ought to at least read the REPC 2 or 3 times minimum, because you will be given some problems on the Utah law portion where they will say this and this and this is happening according to the REPC that was written like this. What will happen? And you'll be given a copy of the REPC that's all filled out, and you can go through the various sections or paragraphs and find out what they decided to do. But if you're familiar with the contract, it's 6 pages. I think that's on like page 3 or 4. It will help you get to that answer quicker. It's like someone gave you a crib sheet to get through the test, but you've got to be familiar with where things are on that sheet. So anyway, I would read it several times. And if you have any questions about it, Dan and I stand ready to help you with those. Let's look at the first question tonight. I like your picture, Carlos. Good picture. Dan, here we go. All right. Number 1. Okay, you've received an earnest money payment in connection with an accepted offer. By law, in absent of any other agreement between the parties, what are we going to do with this earnest money? Okay. Now, the trick here is this absent of any other agreement between the parties by law. See, we have a law in Utah that says that earnest money must be deposited in a trust account within 3 banking days. Okay. And that's answer B, and that's the correct answer. But the law actually says, or as otherwise agreed to between the parties. And so what happens is we are required, in most cases, to use the state-approved REPC contract. Now, there's a few exceptions. If a seller or a buyer insist on using another form, you can do that. But it doesn't happen very often unless you're selling new homes. And you're selling new homes, all the contractors have their own REPC type contract, which greatly favors them. And that's one they require you to use if you want to sell a Rindless Bach, a Bach home, Ivory home, whatever, Symphony home, Walker, whatever. They all have their own contracts, and so you'd use that one. So you'd want to read through that to make sure that you can explain to your buyer what they're getting into. But on the REPC contract, which is what we're going to be using like 98% of the time, unless you're selling a lot of new homes, like I said, it says there is a or otherwise agreed to between the parties. And it's up there in that first section where you're talking about the earnest money deposit. And it says that you can deposit that within 4 days. But that's not what this question says. It says by law, in absent of any other agreement between the parties. Therefore, the correct answer is the money must be deposited in a trust account within 3 banking days, answer B. The other answers, money must be deposited, like D, money must be, on the day received. Forget it. That's too cumbersome. C, the money must be deposited in trust account within 3 working days. I've never seen the term working days anywhere. That's not going to happen. And then A, the money must be deposited in trust account within 3 calendar days. Now it's banking days. Okay. At least that's what the law says. Or as otherwise agreed to between the parties, which the REPC contract has or otherwise agreed to between the parties, and they extend that to 4 days. Okay. And then there's 4 additional days that after the money's been delivered, that the broker has to get it into his trust account, or if they want to, you can put it in, by addendum, you can actually put it into, instead of the brokerage trust account, you can use a title company. Okay, number 2. Any personal property that's included in the REPC as part of the sale, A, will be transferred using a separate bill of sale at closing. Hang on to that one. That's really warm and fuzzy. B, becomes real property. But just because you sold your house doesn't make personal property automatically turn into real property. I mean, well, I'm buying your house, so that means I get your boat, right? Because it's parked in the garage, so I get the boat. No, the boat's personal property. So it doesn't become real property just because it's included in a sale. If they threw in the boat, you'd have to be transferred with a separate bill of sale at closing. C is not obligated to transfer. That's true, unless your REPC includes it. And B must be included in the mortgage, has nothing to do with the mortgage. Okay. So any personal property that's included in the REPC as part of the sale, A, will be transferred using a separate bill of sale at the closing. And there's a specific section in the REPC that has that verbiage in it. So if you'd read it a couple of times, 3 times, you would know the answer to this in a heartbeat, wouldn't you? It's really cool. If you know your stuff, when you get into that test, the vast majority of the questions you'll be able to answer in just a few seconds, maybe 5-10 seconds. Some questions you'll take a little bit more pondering or dredging up of a memory. And some you might want to mark for review and then come back to it later. Because sometimes you're working through the exam and you'll read something in there that will remind you of oh yeah, that's that concept and that other question. And then I would scroll back to that one, or it'll bring them all back to you. But it's really well formatted on when you take the test, so that you can manipulate through it. And to learn how to take the test and get familiar with those procedures, they allow you whatever amount of time you want to take to do that. That's not running on your exam clock. So your exam clock doesn't start until you've done a tutorial and you've played around with it a little bit, so you're familiar with how their software works. And for most of you, it won't be a problem at all. Next one, prorations are completed based on which of the following dates as explained in paragraph 3.2 of the REPC. Now, a proration are things that are continuing items like taxes or sometimes rents or rental deposits. Some of those things have to be prorated and some are just passed on so that you have them like a deposit. But a proration is where we're trying to be fair with everyone, because the taxes due on real estate in our state are not paid until the end of the year. Well, if you're selling a property, mid-year like we are now, in the 7th month, or maybe the 8th or 9th month, as we get through the year, then the seller really ought to pay for this first part of the year the taxes, because the house was theirs, and then the new buyer took over mid-year sometime, and then that buyer from that point on should be responsible for the taxes going forward. So that's called a proration. And it's defined in the REPC on which date do we do the proration. Is it closing? Is it settlement? Is it any of the due diligence deadlines? Because there's several of them, which a financing deadline is one of the due diligence type deadlines. So those are called contingencies. So those two would kind of cancel each other out. So it's either got to be closing, or because they're too similar, they're both contingency deadlines. So it'd either be the closing or the settlement, guys. And the correct answer to this one, if you'd read the REPC, is B, the settlement deadline. And it even defines what settlement is. Settlement in many states, if you've come to Utah from another state, you've done a lot of real estate or familiar with real estate, or maybe you were even licensed in another state, a lot of those states there's no distinction between closing and settlement. like California, for example. But in our state, we break those out. So there's a difference between closing and settlement. Closing really means when something is recorded in our state. It's so that property deed was, they were the sellers giving it to the buyer in exchange for a lot of money these days. So what happens is that's the closing. Closing is defined as recording, and the settlement deadline is when all the money is brought in and the money is delivered from the lender and that sort of thing. And so settlement occurs prior to closing. Closing is the last thing that happens. Well, I guess the last thing happens is the buyer moves in, but the buyer shouldn't move in until after the closing. But the settlement deadline is the date that we agree to in the REPC. That's the date we're going to do our prorations from, which in some cases could be 3 or 4 days in advance of the closing, if there's some delays and whatnot. Okay, the next one is the agency relationship is created in the real estate purchase contract. A, the REPC. B, by separate agency agreement. Ooh, I like that one. C, verbally. What do you think about verbally, guys? Oh, heavens, no. In fact, things are required in real estate because the statute of frauds to be enforceable in a court of law, it has to be written. And by assumption, I don't know. The correct answer here, of course, obviously, is by separate agreement. And that separate agreement is your listing contract, whether it's a seller's listing or a buyer's listing. We have one for each. We have an agency agreement to work with the seller, and we have an agency agreement to work with the buyer. And you can represent either one of those. And because of that agency agreement, they are your clients, and you owe them a fiduciary. Okay, the next question is, according to the contract, after closing, and the buyer owns the home, what happens to any rental agreements on the property? Maybe it was a duplex or a fourplex. And, my first month in the business, I sold a fourplex to a gentleman, and he liked it so much, I sold him 3 more eventually over a period of time. But he wanted to live in one of the units. The first one he bought on a VA loan. VA allowed him to move into one of the 4 units. And actually, when you did all the math on the thing, even though he put little or no money down, the veterans have a right to buy a home with little or no money down because of their service to our country. It's one of the benefits that they receive. That's what he did. And he put very little money down, just closing costs and a few things back in those days. And anyway, with the rents coming in for the other 3 units, he pretty much lived free. Kind of cool. So if you have a young couple that, or perhaps an older couple that wouldn't mind sharing their lot, with others and being a little bit of a landlord collecting rents, they could probably even get a free ride these days because rents are so high. But what happens if, the buyer owns the home now? Well, do you think they automatically terminate? They terminate the buyer's option? No, those agreements remain into effect. Okay. They definitely don't follow the seller to their next property. I mean, that doesn't even make sense. Seller selling his fourplex, moving into a single family or something. The seller, I mean, it may even have moved across country. So the correct answer to this one, of course, is C, they remain in effect. And that's because it's an agreement that does endure. And a tenant has some rights. And one of those rights is they have the right to finish out their term there. And just because you bought it doesn't mean you can go in and double their rent or ask them to leave. If they're on a month-to-month contract, then you could change things relatively quickly, but that's only because they're on a month-to-month basis. If they're on a longer lease, a year or two, heck, commercial properties that may have 2 or 3 years left on their building, or they're part of the building, and they remain in effect. And that's a good thing, particularly if you're buying an investment property that has a cash flow, small medical building or even a larger medical building. I mean, you want those doctors to remain in the building. That's why you paid the money you paid for that building, is because you did an analysis of what the cash flow was. And yeah, this is a good investment. I can put this much money into the building and maybe even get a loan or pay cash or whatever, but yeah, put my money here and I'll get this much money back. I mean, that's great, but if they didn't remain into effect, I mean, gosh, you're taking a risk buying that building. Buy the building and everyone moves out. That wouldn't be good. Okay, the next question. Who's responsible for any capital improvements to the property prior to settlement? Okay, improvements to the property before the settlement. All right. Well, whose property is it? I mean, if we haven't closed on it yet, who still owns the property? Well, the seller does. So, take a wild guess who would be responsible for improving the property if such improvements became necessary for one reason or another. Maybe the buyer did a due diligence investigation and found some things that needed to be done. Today, I attended a class that Dan taught, who is our producer and owner of our school tonight, Mr. Dan Naylor. And Dan was talking about a couple with a young child who bought a property, and then the property ended up having some mold in it. It was a latent defects, and it needed to be fixed. And this was after the closing. Well, after the closing, and they had their right, the buyers did, of their due diligence and everything else, but this wasn't picked up, and the sellers said they didn't know about it. Well, that would be the buyer's responsibility. But good agents get together, and they, reasonable people, and they say, look, I mean, I know you didn't know anything about this, but this is a young child. He can't live in the home because of the mold problem. I mean, it was pretty serious. And so, I mean, the seller said, you know what, I'm a real human being. I'm going to go back and fix that for them. He didn't have to, but he did. People can be really good, if you just give them a chance. But prior to the settlement, of course, the seller would be responsible, right? Not both the buyer and the seller, just the seller prior to the settlement. Because whose house is it still at that point? Well, it's the seller's house. So the correct answer to this one is B, the seller. Okay. Our next question talks about a buyer who received the seller disclosures, and in the disclosures, they found out that the seller had replaced several of the main water lines throughout the home themselves. They did their own plumbing work. If they are not satisfied with the seller performing the repairs in lieu of a licensed professional, what are their options? Well, if you're given the property condition statement and they find things in it that they don't like, in this case, they say, well, I don't know if that was a good plumbing repair. Maybe we ought to have a professional come back and redo that or something. What are the buyer's options? Okay. Well, looking at these, let's talk about them. A, the purchase contract requires the seller to hire someone to redo the repairs. No, it doesn't. It doesn't say that anywhere in the contract. If you'd read it a couple of times, you'd know. B, the buyer has no recourse. They're already under contract to purchase the home. But, this is in the seller disclosure period, and we're assuming this is in the due diligence period. That's why they got the seller disclosure. So the buyer has no recourse. They're already under contract to purchase the home. Well, they are under contract, but they do have contingency rights under their due diligence. At least we're assuming they do. See, the buyer can cancel a contract if they're not satisfied with the information provided in the seller disclosures, and that's the correct answer here. The seller cannot sign another purchase agreement for at least 2 years. Okay. I don't, whatever. Okay. I hope you didn't sucker for something like that. Okay. This is why it's important if a buyer is going to buy a home and then have it looked at. In this case, he or she or they read the disclosures and they read about the seller doing this work, and they were concerned about it. Well, then you can say, well, look, we want an additional due diligence period in order to have a plumber check this out, or we want a plumber to come in and fix it and whatnot. I mean, I'm an amateur plumber and my work's pretty good, but it's not up to professional standards, but it'll probably last pretty good. Okay, all right, next question, please. After the walkthrough inspection, which is true? Now, if you'd read the REPC, you would know that there's a couple kinds of inspections. The first is their due diligence period, which they have the right, if they are really concerned about something or they just don't like what they're finding, they could cancel their contract with no penalty. But that's not what we're talking about here. There's another type of inspection, and it's specifically called the walkthrough inspection. And this is an inspection that can be that I advise all buyers to do. And sometimes they don't do it, but what it really is for is to make sure the house is in the same condition that it was in when they put it under contract. Because sometimes it might take 4 to 6 weeks or so to get these deals closed up. And during that 4 to 6 weeks, something could have gone wrong, a pipe could burst, kid could come over with a bat and break the windows. All kinds of things could have happened, particularly if it's a vacant home. But even if it's occupied, the things could happen to the home, and they need to go and make sure that it's in the same condition. That's all this is good for. Is it in the same condition? Is landscaping still in good shape and whatnot? And sometimes, if you're in the spring and then you're hitting in a hot summer, there may be a few yellow patches, but the seller has to keep that property in the same condition it was in. So what do you think? Can they require additional repairs? No. Well, what about the next one? The seller is no longer liable for the condition of the property? No, that's not true. They got to keep it in the same shape it was in before. Or C, the buyer will be required to write up a property condition report. What, the buyer would? No, that doesn't even make sense. D, the same contract terms remain in effect. Right, that's it. The same contract terms remain in effect. Okay, so a walkthrough inspection usually is done no earlier than 7 days prior to the closing. It's done by appointment that it's agreed to between the buyer and the seller. And it's just kind of a quick walkthrough to make sure the property is in good shape. Now, we have a lot of out-of-town buyers that are coming to Utah, and they're coming to town, they're finding a property, they're making offers, they're getting it under contract, and they go back to wherever they're coming from, to pack up and sell their house back there and then come back a little later. Sometimes they're pushing it, and they might say things like, well, Rick, would you go over and do that walkthrough inspection for us? And my answer is always no. Why? Well, for one thing, I'm not a property inspector. Yeah, I own a lot of properties. I have owned a ton of properties, and I can walk through and kind of give you an idea of what's there, but I don't want to take on that liability. Well, Rick, you walked through it and you said everything was okay, but when we came in, we found a broken cover on a plug or a switch, and so we want you to fix that, and we want you to fix this, and something else went wrong. You should have picked that up on the walkthrough. Most brokers will not allow you to do that. I tell my agents, forget about it. You can't do that. If they wanted, someone to look at it, they could hire an inspector to walk back through, or I don't know, maybe a relative could walk through it with them and do a FaceTime on their phone. There's something else that they need to do rather than, put that on you. Your broker probably won't let you do that anyway. Next question, please. Liquidated damages means what? Liquidated damages mean that the damages are converted to a dollar amount. Yeah, I like that. Hang on to it for a minute. Damages go to mediation. No, liquidated damages are something you're agreeing to. Usually the amount of liquidated damages is the earnest money, and that's referenced in the REPC. Now, if you'd read the REPC, you'd understand this because it's right in there. And so you don't go to mediation, you don't go to court, and damages aren't held in escrow. They're paid out. So the correct answer to this one, the damages are converted to a dollar amount, and that dollar amount is generally speaking the earnest money amount. But Liquidated damages, you're agreeing to take the earnest money and the amount of the default and, by the buyer or the seller. Seller says, well, I'll just keep the earnest money and let you walk away. That's fine. I'm not going to sue you for additional monies. There's several remedies for breach. One of them is you can sue for specific performance, which the courts don't favor that one for residential real estate. They figure, I'm not going to force someone out of their house, but they might, particularly in this market, where things are going up in value and whatnot. But on the other hand, specific performance cases are favored greatly by the courts in regards to commercial real estate, especially when you're assembling parcels. We bought these 3 separate parcels because we needed a big one to put an office building on. And now the guy in the middle says he won't close. Well, we're just take us to a sheet of court and sue him and make him close. That's one that, the judge is going to say, well, wait a minute, this ground won't do them any good if they have the 2 pieces on the outside and you're trying to default, Mr. Seller. You got to sell it to them. So that's one remedy. Another one is you could, give them back the earnest money and just sue for damages and whatever the court might award, or you could just take the earnest money as liquidated damages. Next question, please. According to the real estate purchase contract, what happens if the seller defaults? Now, how could a seller default? Well, there's a lot of things that could happen. One of the things I worry about a lot is a title defect. When I'm listing properties, I talk to the sellers. Now, do you know of any title defects? Do you know if there could possibly be problems? And they're not going to know. Well, I don't think so. I mean, we've lived here 6 years, and we haven't heard of anything or whatever. And so, well, in order to avoid this, a surprise, I would like to order the title insurance policy tomorrow. Okay, and we'll just say on the buyer to be determined. And so they're going to do a comprehensive investigation of the title of the property and issue a commitment for title policy. And on that commitment, we will see if there's a problem or not. Most title problems can be handled in a couple of weeks or so. The problem is if you don't even know about it and you order that title commitment real close to your closing date, and then you find out there's a problem, and it could be something innocuous. I mean, it could be that they bought it a number of years ago and there was a little seller financing and they paid it off years ago, but they never did the proper documentation at the county recorder's office to release that second mortgage. You need a deed of reconveyance recorded in the county records. Now, in this case, perhaps, and I had this happen more than once, the former seller sent my seller, because they'd paid off that owner carried loan, they sent them a copy of the promissory note and they wrote on there paid in full. Well, that's not a deed of reconveyance. A deed of reconveyance is a specific document that releases a trust deed in our state, and it needs to be filled out and signed by the seller. Well, if you don't know where the sellers are, after 6 years or so, I mean, who knows where they are? The seller may not kept in touch with your sellers, the people they bought it from. So you have to track them down, and it could be a problem. But it can all be handled. And you can even do a lost document bond. You can do a lot of other things, but it can't be handled in 3 days before the closing, or 4. It's going to take some time. So this is an example of where a seller could default because they can't deliver good title at the closing. Now, maybe the buyer then is losing the lock on their loan. A lot of horrible things can happen here. So what are we looking at? What are the remedies if a seller defaults? Well, let's look at A. They must pay an amount equal to the earnest money and liquidated damages to the buyer. Okay, and by the way, that's the correct answer. B, they must pay an amount equal to half the earnest money. C, they must pay an amount equal to double the earnest money. or D, the contract is canceled with no recourse, against the seller. No. Those 3 are wrong. The first one is right. And this is what I point out to my sellers when we're listing the home. They say, look, we could get a 5 or 6 or 10. I recently had a transaction where you had a $15,000 earnest money. I got a commercial deal under contract now that's it's up to $60,000 in earnest money. And yeah, we are dang sure that the title is good on that former restaurant property. And because if my seller gets to the point where they can't deliver good title, then they're liable for that 660 grand they'd have to give the buyer if the buyer wanted out of the deal. So anyway, so that's why that's important. Look, good agents, listen up, good agents anticipate problems before they become a problem, and they handle them in advance, and everything just goes so smooth. Well, why? Because of experience. You know that occasionally something could come up. Well, okay, to figure out if it's going to come up or not, let's do all this work in advance so that we know there's no problem. Even on some properties, I've had properties from hell where, methamphetamine, radon, there was a shared well with no written agreement. Let me see what else went wrong. All kinds of crap, mold, broken, and it's just horrible, So when I listed that property, it says, we're not putting it on the market until you get these 16 things. Actually, it's more like 12. These 12 things fixed. And then we'll put it up on the market. Okay. Because we're going to have to fix them anyway. So we got together and did all that stuff and got it all done. And then we put it on the market. But one of those things was also I ordered the title insurance. And sure enough, there was he had the property in a trust at one point, and he didn't do it correctly and didn't transfer it out of the trust correctly. And so that took us a month to fix that. But other than that, then we were ready to go. So you do what you want to do, but you want referrals from people, then you give them realistic expectations. You work your tushy off to get everything done that needs to be done. And then you get to the closing, and then the people say things to you. Like I recently had one seller say to me, Rick, I am so glad that you handled this transaction because I don't think another agent would have been able to get it done. Why? Because we anticipated problems and we handled them in advance, and it was smooth, but it could have been horrible. Okay. Particularly that house from hell. Okay. Next question, please. Daniel. Okay. The next question is, Agent F received an offer on their client's property that expired on Thursday. Okay, so here you're an agent, you got an offer on your seller's property, and it expired on Thursday. On Friday, their client wants to accept the offer. Well, we decided we want to do that one. Okay, what can Agent F do? Well, have the client sign the agreement and then call the other agent to see if they'll accept it. Yeah, it expired. There's an expiration date. The offer was dead. You got to do more than that. So A doesn't work. Have the client meet with the buyer to sign the offer. That's going to be difficult. Maybe the buyer's from out of state. Maybe the buyer's represented by another agent. They don't want you to run over there and meet with their guy without them there. Meet with the other agent to sign the offer. Well, the agent can't sign it. It's got to be signed by the buyer. So correct answer here is D. Ask the other agent for a new offer since the original offer has expired. That's the easiest way to handle this. Then all I have to do is, with electronic signatures and stuff today, you can probably have that in your hands in a half an hour or an hour or so, assuming that people are near a computer. And then your seller can sign it, and then it's binding, it's under contract. If the buyer really wants that property, just because their offer expired, they may have put a really short expiration date on it to kind of force the seller into deciding in their favor. Well, if you don't agree by this time, Thursday, then at 5 o'clock, well, then, or whenever they wanted it to expire, they put it in there, and they're kind of forcing them into accepting it quickly. A lot of sellers say, nah, if they want it now, they'll probably want it later. And so they call you up Friday and say, okay, we want to do that one. Well, then you need to go out and make it happen for them. But the easiest way would be to call the other agent, say, hey, my sellers, I know the offer expired last night, but my sellers are willing to accept that offer now if you'll just rewrite it with the new dates. That's the way to do it. Number 12, okay, which of the following uses is not a legal use of the state-approved real estate purchase contract addendum? This is a state-approved form. You know, we have a number of state-approved forms, and this is one of them. The real estate purchase contract is state-approved. The real estate purchase contract for new construction is state-approved, although probably won't be used that much. Each contractor, like I said, will have their own. And there's other state-approved contracts as well, including this one, which is the addendum. So what can we do this for? It's not a legal use of the state-approved contract, not. Now, I like the test that we're currently using because that word not will be bolded, you know, so there's no question that they're trying to slip that not in there, okay? Okay, so what can we not use it for? Submit a counteroffer. Well, our real estate purchase contract addendum is actually an addendum and a counteroffer form. You just have to check which one you're going to use it for. So that's correct. You can. That is not the right answer because this is a negative question. It is not a legal use. Alter the language in the REPC purchase contract. Well, that's what you use an addendum for. You know, what you're trying to do in this transaction needs further clarification. It's not exactly written the boilerplate way that the REPC is written. So you might want to change that a little bit or clarify something. And so that's what you do use to alter the language. C, add terms and conditions, same thing. So the correct answer to this one is D. You don't use the REPC contract and you do not certainly use the addendum to define any type of commission agreement. The commission agreements are in the agency contracts, which is called the listing contract, which incidentally is not a state-approved contract. Interesting, isn't it? We don't have a state-approved listing contract. We do have some listing contracts that were put together by the Utah Association of Realtors, and that's what most of us use. But you could use a customized listing contract. Now, today in Dan's class, there was a lot of discussion about, well, you need permission from the seller to do this. You need permission from the seller to do that. That could all be written into a customized listing contract. Yeah, if you don't like the one that the Board of Realtors has, you don't have to use that. Your broker could have their own custom listing agreement. And, you know, something to consider because there are certain things that you might want to put in there, like the use of a title company to hold earnest money and other things that you can get pre-approval on from them. You know, that might be to your advantage. I don't know. Okay, and we have another question coming up here, which is a sales agent has written an offer. Ooh, I love it when that happens. I love it when you write offers. Okay, the buyer and seller agree to change the closing date. Okay, well, you know, there's one thing we need. This closing is a little too far or it's a little too close. We need to change that. Okay, the sales agent must, okay, change the actual contract and then have people initial it. Always a poor practice. I'm not saying it's not done, but it is a bad form. Okay, so that's not what you should do. Modify the contract by completing an addendum. That's the one you should do. We just talked about the addendum. The addendum is the form you use to alter the terms in a contract. And some of those terms could have been customized for this particular deal, but, you know, we have to do, you know, change a date a little bit, you know, on a closing, which is, you know, well, it's not that big a deal. Well, then it's going to be an easy thing to write on an addendum. You know, send a letter to the title company notifying them the change date. No. The title company will close the deal according to what the agreement between the parties says, and that's the REPC contract. So if you want to do something that's a little different, then you're going to have to do an addendum, or they won't do it. Complete a change of date form. Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, there is no change of date form. I mean, that's called the addendum. Okay, so the correct answer, guys, is B, modify the contract by completing an addendum. Okay, those are the things we want to talk about tonight. Does anyone have any particular questions that we may have brought up by our discussion this evening, or other questions that you have that we could address at this time? Now's your chance to chime in and get some clarification on something. It could be any topic. This is your chance to participate. Anybody have any questions about something? Okay. Well, then let me leave it with a little story that I think hopefully you'll find motivational. My first sale in this business was my first week in the business. It was my brother-in-law, bless his heart, who had waited till I got a license to go out and buy a house. So day one, when my license was in my hot little hand, I had my brother-in-law in my car, and we found a house, and I wrote up an offer and took it to my sales manager to have him look it over, and he rewrote it for me, make it better. And then I took it over to the listing agent, and then we got it accepted. You know, that all happened within about a day and a half, and we got my first deal under contract. Thank you, Stephen. My brother-in-law. And then I asked Stephen, I said, Stephen, gosh, I mean, he was excited when we got that under contract. I mean, the best time to ask someone for a referral is when they're happy. People are, well, I can't ask for a referral. We haven't closed the deal yet. Well, they may not be happy then. I mean, ask for referral when they're happy. So I asked Stephen, I said, do you know anyone else that wants to do something in real estate, Stephen? You're the only person I know in town. We just moved to that community. And he says, yeah, there's a guy that I know that's thinking about selling his house. Well, let's get him on the phone. Little Stephen called him and said, hey, this is Steve. Man, I'm so excited. We just bought a new house, and it's just around the corner from yours. And, it's blah, blah, blah. And, you said you're in church the other day. You said you might be selling your house. Yeah, well, good. I'd recommend my brother-in-law. He helped us get this place. In fact, he's standing here with me. Here, let me hand him the phone. I says, yeah, this is Rick. You're thinking about, oh, you are? Well, when can I come over? Tonight? Yeah, that'd be great. So I went over there, listed their house. So my first listing and my first sale was a relative that got me into both those. Okay. Now, the moral of this short little story, this is just the beginning part of the story, but the short little story is that I don't understand this. I'm helping a young agent get going now, and we finally got her a couple of listings, and one of them should, they probably are both going to be under contract this weekend, and I'm very happy for her, but she won't talk to her relatives. And I said, you got to go out and talk to your relatives. They're the people that'll support you from the beginning. Yeah, but they all know I'm new. I said, yeah, but they love you. I mean, and you're licensed by the state of Utah. How bad could you screw it up? I mean, you got a broker that's going to look over things for you too. Oh, well, I just want to get some more experience before well, you may not get any experience because listings are kind of tough to get right now. And when you do get one, it's probably going to be a commission quick, so if you've got relatives that'll support you in the beginning, you need to do that, and you need to ask them for business. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. I like to offer value to people. So I might say, would you like me to come out and look at your house and give you an idea what it's worth in this crazy market? Or you might have a report on real estate. We get quarterly reports from the board on all the stats, and you can put them in pie charts, and a lot of this is already done. And you can have the Carlos white paper report that comes out quarterly that you send to your relatives, Carlos. And I don't know if you have one, but the little teenager at at home could help you put that together, and publish it and then send it. And wow, this Carlos, and he's new, but look, well, man, he knows all the stuff about real estate. This is cool. There are a lot of ways you can approach these people, but what I'm telling you is you need to approach them because they're the ones that will support you in the beginning. Okay, so I did that. Okay, and then that got my sales manager's attention. 2 deals my first week, and this is kind of cool. I need to get to know this kid a little better. I used to be young, anyway. So I started this business in my 20s. Anyway, so he took me in his car because it had air conditioning, and we went out cruising around the community. He said, let me show you around town a little bit and some of the hot areas. And we went out and looked at a few places. He didn't care about showing me areas. He just wanted to get to know me better. And we talked a lot. And we're driving through this neighborhood, and there was a house. It was a duplex, actually. And it had big weeds in front of it. And I says, whoa, that is weird. When I moved here to this community about 3 months ago, I was looking for a place to rent. And I was broke, man. I didn't know any real estate. I had a Volkswagen Bug, anyway. But the point is, I was looking for a place to rent, and I saw that house, and it was vacant then, and it's vacant now. That's really strange. And then my sales manager used the takeaway close. He said, well, kid, do you want to follow up on it, or do you want me to follow up on it? And I said, well, you got all the business you need. I need to follow up on it. And so I went down to the county records. The training when I started in the 70s, guys, sucked. No one taught you how to do anything. So I went down to the county records, went into the county assessor's office, and they said, oh, well, you need to go to the recorder's office. So I went to the recorder's office, and it had this little piece of paper in there. It's about this size, and it was cardstock, and it had printing on one side. I don't even know what it was, but they cut it up for scratch paper. And I wrote the address on that paper, and I gave it to the gal that came to the counter, and she says, okay, I'll look up the owner for you. And she looked it up, and she came back and says, okay, this is the owner of that property. His name was John Desbobic. So I went back to the office, and back in those days, we had phone books. I looked him up in the phone book, and I wrote down his number on that little cardstock paper, and I called it, and no one answered. I didn't know what I was doing. So I kept calling, and I'd write down the day and the time, no answer, no answer, no answer, no answer. And I made about 5-6 calls. The guy was never home. But one day I called, and he answered the phone. And I says, Mr. Desbobic, this is Rick Roller. I'm a rookie real estate guy. I may have omitted the rookie part. But anyway, and I said, you got this great duplex. I'd like to, do you want me to help you come out and do something, rent it or do something? And he said, well, I really don't want to do anything with the duplex right now. And I said, well, and then he says, thank you, and got off the phone. Well, that was a short conversation. Didn't make sense to me. I mean, I had no assets, really, except I was hungry, and for me to see a guy that had this beautiful new duplex, it was a new building, okay? It had never been occupied. And he wasn't doing anything with it. It didn't make sense to me. Man, if I had a cool asset like that, I'd be maximizing the profit out of the building, maybe living in half and renting the other, and whatever, So I called him back. Well, he didn't answer. So I kept calling, and I talked to him again. And the conversation went a little bit longer. He told me a little bit more about the property. He'd had it for sale, and the realtor couldn't get it closed. And then he'd had a problem with the sewer, had backed up in it. And then he had to put a check valve in and replace carpet and drywall downstairs. It's just been a real problem for him. And I says, well, John, it's a wonderful property. We really ought to do something with that, And he, let me think about it, Well, yeah, well, all right. So I picked up that paper, that card, and I counted up the dial attempts. It was like 26 or 27 or something. And I'd only talked to him a couple of times. And I looked at it and says, this guy isn't going to do anything with that property. And I looked at the little round garbage can was by my desk, and I thought, I'm just going to throw this sucker away. And I didn't. Little voice said, call one more time. All right, I'll call one more time. I picked up the phone, and I dialed the number, and he recognized me. Oh, hello, Rick. He says, you really want to do something with this property? Yeah, John, I really do. And he says, well, all right, come on out and list it. Now, that was a Wednesday, so I went out and listed the property, and back in those days, we didn't even have cell phones. After about 7 months in the business, I got a radio phone for my car, and a pager. We had those, but we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have internet. We didn't even have computers really. Anyway, so IBMs and Apples hadn't come out yet. But anyway, I put it in the newspaper. So I ran an ad for Friday and Saturday and Sunday. I got the weekend rate, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Okay. So, that was Wednesday, put that in. Paper comes out on Friday and I get a call from a guy named Roger Mayland. And he said, this is Roger Mayland. And I see you have this duplex for sale. I'd like to take a look at that. And I said, oh, great. We could do that tomorrow, Saturday, if you'd like. He said, yeah, that'd be fine. I said, why don't you meet me at my office and we'll talk about you and what you're trying to accomplish, and then we'll run out and take a look at it. He says, fine. So he came to the office, and little round maple table, in a little conference room. I brought him in there and found out that Mr. Malin was actually a very high level government employee, the GS 14 or 15, and made a ton of money. And he was tired of paying taxes, and he just read the most recent Get Rich Quick and Real Estate book, which was at that time was written by a guy named William Nickerson. I got a copy of it right up there. William Nickerson, How I Took $1,000 and Turned It into $1 million in Real Estate, part-time. He'd read that book, man, and he was just hot to do something. And so we got in his car to go out and look at the property because it had air conditioning. Anyway, we drove out there and he loved the duplex. He just loved it. He said, oh, this is fantastic. I love it. And he said, now, but he'd read the book. And the book says, well, ask the seller to do like 10% carryback, so you only have to put 10% down, 10% carryback at an 8% loan. Do you think the seller would do this? Well, yeah, well, let's go back and write it up. So went back to the office, little round maple table, sat down, and we wrote it up. Okay. This time it was pretty good because I'd done some studying since the first deal. And so I, that was Saturday afternoon. I'm calling John. Does Bobick? And he's not home. This guy was gone all the time. Anyway, I kept calling. He's not home. Sunday morning, I got a call from another broker who said, yeah, I went over and showed that property. It was on a lockbox. Yeah, I put it on a lockbox. And he said, well, I got an offer for you. He says, well, I've written one too. How do we do this? He says, well, kid, here's how you do it. You take my offer and you take your offer and you show it to the seller and he can pick whichever one he wants. Oh, okay, I can do that. So he brought his offer over, and back in those days, you actually had to go and see each other because we didn't have a way of transferring things. I mean, we barely had a fax machine. But anyway, so he brought it over, and Sunday I'm calling. John's not home. Monday morning I'm calling and John answers the phone. And I says, John, this is Rick. I have 2 offers on your duplex. Okay. I don't know where we're going to get that book, Lindy. I try Amazon. It's William Nickerson's, How I Took $1,000 and Turned It into $1 million in Real Estate and Part-Time. Okay. But anyway, sometimes as an adult, you have these problems and they become like millstones hanging around your neck. And of course, you're approaching all these problems rationally, like John was, which was just ignoring it. And so what happens is when I came over there and I had 2 offers, he started to feel this millstone lifting off his neck because his wife had been bugging him a lot about that property. He says, John, because he lived across the street from the duplex. He'd bought 2 lots and built a new home for himself and a duplex across the street. And so every morning he'd get up and the wife would say, well, honey, what are you going to do about the duplex today? So when I brought those 2 offers over and laid them on his desk, and I'd done net sheets on both of them, my sales manager had helped me work those up. And so the offer from the other agent was about $500 better than mine. And I said, well, John, here are the 2 offers. Here's what you're going to net out of these deals. Obviously, the one that's better is the one from the other agent. You make more money. Rick, which one's better for you? I said, John, that's irrelevant. This one gives you a little bit more money. And he says, no, I want to pick the one that's best for you. Sometimes when you do nice things for people, you want to do nice things back, and John, that's this one, because I'm on both sides of the commission, and so that other agent and I were never friends. After that, that's what he picked. I mean, what can I say? So that was cool. But what was really cool, John was a big guy, and he said, "Oh, I want to introduce you to somebody here." And so we were in his home office, and he kind of grabbed my arm and he's pulling me out of his house, and we're walking down the street. I thought, okay. He's pulling me, and he starts pounding on this door. It's about 4 doors down. The door opens up, and in the door is standing Donnie Jeswinski. Now, Donnie Jeswinski and John Desbobic were good hunting and fishing buddies, and John, who had been a builder in the past, was teaching Donnie how to be a contractor, and they were buddies. And he looks at Don and he says, Don, this is Rick Roller, the greatest real estate agent that's ever walked the face of the earth. There are some words to that effect, because I just solved this problem in his mind. And he says, you need to use Rick in every real estate deal you ever do. And Donnie looks at John, who was his mentor, and he looks at me and he says, okay, because Donnie had just fired his broker like a week before. And so in the next week or so, Donnie listed about 5 homes with me, and over the next year, about 60 to 75 homes a year for years. One day, Donnie and I were sitting in the savings and loan president's office, and everyone loved Donnie. They just loved him, and he was a wonderful guy. And he's saying, well, Donnie, you guys ought to keep some of these properties you're building. We'll just roll these construction loans over into permanents for you. And since I was sitting there with Donnie figured, well, I guess that means both of us, we should do this together. And so Donnie and I ended up owning like 4 or 5 homes together. I mean, one was a duplex, and then 4 other homes, and that we would build. I'd find the lots. Donnie would build the home. Neither one of us had a dime in it back in those days. And the savings loan would roll a loan over into a permanent, or both our names were on title. And my job was to keep it rented and to manage it going forward. And Donnie's job was to build it. And of course, I found the lots, and that was pretty cool. But remember the buyer, Roger Mayland? He became my most loyal buyer, because after he bought that duplex, he went on a buying frenzy. He says, well, what else you got? And I says, well, John, I've got this lot over here. It shows some promise. Okay, I'll take it. What else you got? Well, I have 4-plex over here. You could use your VA. Oh, okay, I'll take that. Roger became my most loyal buyer. He'd call me up and said, Rick, there's another 4-plex around the corner from the 3 others you've already sold me. Could you represent me? It just popped up for sale. I said, sure, Raj, I'll get out there and get that done right now. Okay. And, one day Donnie showed up at the office, and walked in with this other guy that had a tape measure on his belt. Like Donnie always wore a tape measure on his belt, and figured it was another contractor. And he was. And he says, this is my friend Dan, and he needs someone like you to help him. Could you help Dan the way you helped me? And then I picked up another builder too. So guys, now I'm not telling you the story because there's something special about me. I'm telling you the story because there's something special about you. And I don't know what your niche is going to be, but I do know that that whole niche that incidentally made me Rookie of the Year took me out of poverty into a beautiful home up on the hill with the rich people within 6 months of being in real estate. All this stuff was because I made one more call. I could have thrown that card stock away and not called John back, but I made one more call, and that led to this vein of gold that I mined for years. So when you get discouraged, when it's tough, I want you to remember this story, because it's not going to be just my story. It's going to be your story. And I promise you that every experienced agent that's had imminent success in this business has the same story, very similar, to where they found this vein of gold. And they're all a little different, maybe. Mine were young builders, but you just mine it, I don't know what yours is going to be, but I know it's out there for you. But you've got to make that one more call. I know you guys can do a lot of good in this business, and you can bless a lot of lives and help a lot of people. And one of the lives you're going to bless is your own and your family, and create a dynasty if you want to. Okay. But you've got to make that one more call. Okay. That's it for tonight, folks. Please understand that, get a copy of the REPC and read it. Please understand that we're here to help. Call Dan, call me. Happy to go through things with you on the phone. I don't want you to take a concept and just fret about it for a half an hour or 45 minutes trying to figure it out on your own. Pick up the stupid phone and call me. Do not text. Call me. We will have a meaningful 3-minute conversation, and you'll understand it. I promise you. Maybe 4 minutes. And it'll be fun, and you'll get it. And you'll pass the test, and you'll be in a position to make one more call. Thanks for being with us tonight. Dan, do you have any closing comments?
Just a big thank you to you, Rick, for your experience and for helping us with these contract topics. We really appreciate you being here. You do an excellent job for us. Yeah, anyone give Rick a call, give me a call if you have any questions about the content, and we're happy to help you with anything we can.
Have a good night, folks.
Thank you very much.
Make it happen, okay?
Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.